Well, hey, welcome all you wiretappers out there. It's good to be back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. This is Gary Jenkins, your host and producer of Gangland Wire podcast. I am a retired Kansas City police detective and sergeant. I was in the intelligence unit for 13 years, 14 maybe altogether. After I left, I got into making documentary films, and I made 3 documentary films you can find on Amazon. Just search for my name and Mafia. You'll find all kinds of stuff about me and what I've done. So we won't belabor that, but let's get on to the show. I have a man that I recently met, a Kansas City man. It's John Sanders. He's a Kansas City-based screenwriter and author. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Gary. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, John got hold of me and he just wanted to meet and talk about the mob because he had this big interest in it. So we met at a coffee shop here close to me and had a nice long conversation. And he was telling me in particular, he's been working on something about Owney Madden. And I hadn't done anything on Owney Madden, or if I did, it was a long time ago in the early beginnings of the Irish mob in New York. And I thought, what an idea for a show. So John graciously agreed to come on the show and share his knowledge, the story of Owney Madden. So, John, tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started talking about Owney.
Okay. Well, I was the son of a guy who was born and raised in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And anybody who knows anything about Owney Madden knows that he became the main man in Hot Springs, Arkansas. And was growing up with stories about how he would see Owney sitting in the front of the Southern Club where he would dispense wisdom and give out cash and help and take care of people. He was a very generous guy all through most of his life. Recently started working on a screenplay about Owney's life, thinking about my dad's stories. And I found him to be just a fascinating character, and one that I could really get get connected to, because you could see through the course of his life how he started out as a thug and a killer, and learned and became much more sophisticated in what he did, highly respected in the mob world. And I enjoyed that aspect of his growth, where a lot of gangsters don't get that opportunity to do any growth. Owney was an English-born gangster who came to the United States with his mother after being born in Leeds. His parents were Irish, so that got him some cred in Hell's Kitchen when they landed in Hell's Kitchen. And by the age of 14, he was running with the Gophers, which was one of the main gangs in New York. They called themselves the Gophers for some reason, but we'll call them the Gophers for now. They of course, had their share of opponents in the streets, and one of those was the Hudson Dusters. They were their main opponent. They would have run-ins with them and battles. And at one point, Owney, who by this time had been running the Gophers, had followed his estranged wife to a Hudson Duster dance hall. He just wanted to keep an eye on her. So he's sitting up in the balcony watching, and he turns around, and all of a sudden there's 11 Hudson Dusters standing behind him, and they all pull out guns, and they all shoot him. He ended up with 11 bullets in him. They thought, everyone thought he was dead, and but he wasn't. He was they asked who did it. He said, I did it to myself. We'll take care of it. Amazingly, they got him to the hospital. They were going to stop at the morgue, but he pulled through, I believe it was 6 bullets out of him, and they had to leave 5 behind. And those things would bug him the rest of his life. He had all sorts of problems with that. But he survived it in a matter of a couple of weeks. 6 of the Dusters who had shot him were dead. He was back running the streets. But while he was down, one of his guys, a guy named Patsy Doyle, who was kind of a psychopathic guy who was in the Gophers, wanted to take over. And he was telling everybody that Owney was done for. He wanted to take his spot. Well, Owney wasn't much for that kind of disloyalty. So Patsy was found beat up pretty good with a lead pipe that was wrapped in newspaper, and that was Owney's tool of choice when it comes to beating people up. He survived, but he started doing stupid things like, snitching on Owney and telling the cops what he was up to. And so that he had to be taken out. And unfortunately, people that lured Patsy to his demise in a cafe pinned it on Owney. They apparently were coerced by the prosecutors. The guys that actually did the shooting went to prison he was convicted on manslaughter and sent up to Sing Sing for 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, I'm trying to
And
remember on that setup at that cafe. Did a woman, somebody that only knew a woman, then lure him to that cafe?
Interestingly enough, all of Owney's troubles seemed to hang around women. I
Women.
mean, the guys that he shot were hitting on their girlfriends. And
Exactly.
Frida Hopper, who was on again, off again, one of Owney's girlfriends, Patsy Doyle was absolutely infatuated. And that was the only reason he came, because he wanted to see Frida. And unfortunately, Frida got coerced into saying that he was involved, and he ended up in prison. It was in prison where he really blossomed, I guess you can say. He decided that, even though he claimed that he had nothing to do with the Patsy Doyle murder, he decided, well, I've done enough things, so this is probably justice, even though I didn't do this one. And so he decided to be the best he could be in prison. He became friends with the warden, Laws, who would, I mean, he was a celebrity in prison at this point. He was able to calm down gangs that were having problems in prison. He was very much appreciated by Warden Laws. And when new inmates would come in, he'd call Owney over to see the guys getting off the bus. He said, "What do you think about that? What do you think about that guy?" And Owney would give him the straight scoop. He's a smart guy, but he's this, and that. He spent 7.5 years in prison, and during that time, he was having a lot of problems with his stomach. For some reason, just glommed on to the prison surgeon, a guy named Dr. Steele, to the point where after he got out of prison, whenever he had any problems with his stomach, he wouldn't trust regular doctors. He'd go up to Sing Sing and have that doctor work on him. He was just held in high regard and got out after 7.5 years or so.
Yeah,
so he comes out
was
in
that
19...
was that a reduction? Seemed like he would have got more than 7 years for murder.
Well, he was on parole, and it was
Okay.
it was supposed to be a 10 to 20, but he got out 7.5 years on good behavior because the lawyer or the warden really appreciated him.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I was
So,
curious.
so yeah, he should have had at least 10 years. He gets out in 1923, and Prohibition has just kicked in, and the Gophers are gone, and so he needs to figure out a way to make some money, but try to do it in a smart way and not with a gun. After that stint in prison, he would never carry a gun. Shortly after he gets out, he hooks up with Frank Costello, who is a major rum runner and just getting started in bringing in shipments from whiskey from Canada or Scotland, rum from Jamaica or the Caribbean. They became very, very close friends for the rest of their lives. And during that time, he also met up with a guy who became his closest business associate, and that guy was named Big Frenchy Demange. And they were an odd couple because at this point, Owney was a very classy British guy with a beautiful accent and very precise, always dressed to the nines. And here's Frenchy, who was this thug who was loyal and did whatever Owney wanted him to do. And interestingly enough, had been a Hudson Dustin. He didn't care. It was he trusted this guy, and he got him all dressed up and made him look presentable. And he became partners in all of his rum running, his brewery that he had in Manhattan, all his nightclubs, including the Cotton Club. And so he was very much a part of Owney's life. And fun story about Big Frenchy. He was a bit of a clod. When the Atlantic City Crime Conference came together, Owney was going to be honored at at the end of it, and they wanted Big Frenchie to do it, and they were going to give him a
And
beautiful gold
that
watch.
and that was, let's explain that Atlantic City Crime Conference. That's when the I can't remember the boss down in Atlantic City, the whole and Boardwalk, the documentary,
Nucky Johnson.
Nucky Johnson. He had Lucky Luciano and Costello and even Al Capone and all these beer barons or mobsters who were in bootlegging to come and line up, get it organized throughout the United States so they would do business rather than fight each other. Is that right?
Right. Absolutely. That was what the early stages of the crime commission.
Right. Okay.
And an interesting story about that is, Capone came thinking he was the cat's pajamas, and this was not too long after the St. Valentine's massacre, and they all angry with him for making so much noise, and they told him, "You have to go to jail just to
Yeah.
take some heat off, on a lesser crime." He wasn't happy about it, but he did it.
Now,
But at
remind
this
me,
con
and that isn't that when he went to jail, like in Pennsylvania, for like a year, some kind of a phony baloney gun charge or
it
something?
was just yeah, weapons charge. He was carrying a gun, and I think he only spent a couple months in prison or in jail.
Okay. Okay. All
Yeah,
right. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I just tried to get
no
it in
problem.
my mind.
But back to Big Frenchie, he was a good-hearted guy, and he was as tight as you could be with Owney. And so when they wanted to, at the end of the conference, make a presentation to Owney, thanking him for his great organization and what a great guy he was, and so they had Big Frenchie do. So he calls him up. He's not used to giving presentations, so he says, "Okay, Owney, you got a watch?" I said, "Yeah, give it to me." And he hands him his watch. I'm sure it was a very nice one. And Big Frenchie drops it on the ground and stomps on it. He said, "What did you do that for?" He says, "Well, you got a new one. Here, take this one." Now, that's a story that came from Barney Raditsky, the old New York detective who told that same story at the
Oh.
Key Fob hearings back in the 50s. Uh, yeah, he was a very interesting guy. Things were going great in the 20s for Owney. I mean, my goodness, he just months after getting out of prison, he and Big Frenchie and Arnold Rothstein go in together to buy the Cotton Club, which, well, they created the Cotton Club. It was a different club prior to that, and they ended up having quite a few clubs and speakeasies. Again, this was Prohibition. The Cotton Club was his flagship. That was the one that he really loved, and you could tell when he loved a certain something, a certain building or something, because he'd always put a pigeon coop on top because he just loved messing with pigeons. He
Oh,
learned that
really?
from his
Huh.
dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the 20s were going great. He was making money hand over fist. And Costello had a fleet of ships bringing in booze. They had he had his own brewery in Manhattan, the Phoenix Brewery, which had been making near beer. He bought it, started making Madden's number one, which was at the time the premier beer that you could get during Prohibition. Before that, it was just this colored water that you could get from Dutch Schultz. So he became very, very famous for Madden's number one because of his close ties to Tammany Hall, Jimmy Hines, the police, and all the money he paid out. His brewery was protected by the police to the point where even if the feds showed up trying to break in, the local cops would stop him and turn him back and say, "You're not getting in here. You got no business here." He had a lot of power, had a lot of influence in New York, and he was rolling along just fine until Mad Dog Cole decided to target him. Now, Mad Dog he was a wild Irish thug who had originally been a gopher and then went to work for Dutch Schultz as a hitman and guarding liquor shipments and things like that. And Cole decided he got a little too big for his britches and decided he wanted to go 50-50 partners with Schultz, and Schultz wasn't having it. And so he decided to split off with some of Schultz's guys and started killing some of Schultz's guys that didn't go with him. Shot up the front of the Helmar social, trying to get Jerry Rayo, who was Schultz's gambling guy. He didn't get Rayo, but he killed a little kid who was standing in front selling lemonade. And in fact, Rayo, victim, would throw pennies out on the front of his social club so that the kids would come and collect them and nobody would think about shooting it up. Well, Mad Dog would. And that's how he got his name. He gets out, they show up, he pulls out his Tommy gun and tears the place up and kills a little kid. He was definitely a scourge in New York. Everyone wanted him gone. And then he started doing something. He wanted to make a little more money through kidnapping. The Purple Gang in Detroit were doing some of that, making some money. So he thought he'd give it a try. And he decided that the guys with the money at that time during the Depression were the crooks. So he decided, hey, Owney's probably a softer target than Dutch. So he went after and actually kidnapped Big Frenchie. Called Owney up and said, I got Big Frenchie, and it's going to cost you 50 grand to see him again. Owney tried to negotiate, but he said, nah, I'm coming over. He actually walked into his office at the Cotton Club. Owney had the money, and this was a very unwise move. Big Frenchie got released. Mad Dog decided that was a pretty easy score, so he calls Owney up and says, okay, I'm going to make you a deal. You give me $100,000 and I won't kidnap you. Owney just hung up on him and he was ticked off, calls a meeting of the guys. Luciano was there, Meyer Lansky, Dutch Schultz, because he was the target of Cole as well. And they basically said, okay, Cole's got to go. They just couldn't find him. It took a while to find him. He was in hiding. And in the meantime, Owney decides to take a vacation. And Dutch had been telling him about this great place down in Arkansas called Hot Springs, where gangsters can, do whatever they want. Everyone, it's nobody's shooting up anybody. It's got gambling that nobody cares about. They got a racetrack. They got hot springs where you can soak during the day and then gamble and listen to major entertainment at night. And so he decides to go down there, but Dutch tells him, make sure you meet the cute girl at the gift shop across from the Arlington Hotel. He goes in there, and that's where he meets Agnes Demby, who was to be the love of his life. She was, had a little gift shop and was struggling mightily during the Depression. He walks in and spends $1,000 on gifts and invites her out to dinner. She says no, but changes her mind shortly thereafter, and they spent the next 2 weeks together. Fell very much in love. When he went back to New York, he gave her a train ticket to come up and visit when things looked like they were, calm. So he gets up there. Nobody's seen or heard of Mad Dog. So he thought, okay, he brings up Agnes. Well, unfortunately, Mad Dog hears that Agnes is in town and that Owney's, got a new girlfriend. Says something to basically threaten his girlfriend. That just made Owney's blood boil. He and Dutch decided, okay, let's put an end to this. So this is according to his Owney's biographer, Graham Noun, in the book Arkansas Godfather, describes how the whole hit happened. He was hiding out in a hotel, and he had a bodyguard that they were able to get to. And they paid the bodyguard 50 grand to set him up. Bodyguard comes and says, Owney wants to talk to you, wants to settle this thing, he wants to talk, So he set up a phone conversation in a drugstore that Cole was comfortable in. Bodyguard leads him over there, and he goes into the phone booth waiting for the call. The call comes just as a sedan pulls up, and one of Schultz's hitmen walk in. The bodyguard walks out. He tells everybody to be quiet, and while he's on the phone with Owney, Mad Dog gets his final reward, and right through the glass in the phone booth. All that glass was torn out, but he didn't chip any of the wood around it. I mean, this guy was could really handle his Tommy gun.
Especially with the Tommy gun, because those things, I don't know if you've ever shot an automatic, but if you hold it down for any length of time, they just start rising on you. You have to really know what you're doing. You have to practice with it to hold it steady.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Well, apparently Dutch Schultz's guys have plenty of practice.
Apparently so.
So that was the demise of Mad Dog. After all this, everyone, of course, was looking at Owney. Parole board was looking at him, and this Judge Seberg, who was trying to crack down on all the corruption in New York, wanted to send him back on parole violation. He was still on parole at this point in 31. He sicked his investigators on Owney, and they were interrogating him and said, "So where are you working?" He said, "Well, I work at this laundry." As it turned out, he was a part owner of the laundry. He knew the owner of the that ran the laundry, but he hadn't gotten his story straight, unfortunately. The judge sends the investigators over, minutes after Owney walks out, and asks him, "You know this guy?" "Oh yeah, Owney's a great guy. Does he work here?" No, he didn't work here. Well, that was enough. Lying to the parole board was enough to send him back to Sing Sing. They had to, he had a good attorney, and had pull, and he was supposed to go back that day, but he was, just a bizarre legal maneuver. He was able to get out on bail for a parole violation, which is just not done.
Go figure.
There's no bail.
Right.
And oddly enough, while he's out waiting for this final decision, he gets a call from Charles Lindbergh. And Lindbergh, this was right after his baby had been kidnapped. And he comes to Owney Madden asking for help to find out if it was one of these, like the Purple Gang. They thought Fleischer might have been the one to nab the kid. And he did what he could and met with him several times, but he wasn't able to help him out other than tell him it was.
Yeah.
So Owney ends up going to prison again, Sing Sing. But he hated all the media attention, all that stuff. He didn't want his picture in any papers, whatever. So rather than turn himself in at the courthouse, he gets himself driven up to Sing Sing and walks up to the front door. Nobody's expecting him, and the guard on the other side of this iron grate says, "Who the hell are you?" He didn't know who he was. He said, "I'm Owney Madden. I think the warden is holding a cell for me." And he said, "Yeah, get the hell out of here." And it just so happened that the warden's secretary was walking by, and Owney saw him and called out to him. And so they finally let him in. And he was there for a good year, spent time, with, staying in touch with Agnes. And by the end of his year term, he got out, and he, along with some of the other guys in New York, including Meyer Lansky, basically orchestrated his retirement, I guess you can say. He left New York and promising never to come back. That was the rule. They had a deal. You can go, you can get out of here, but you can never come back. Says, okay. He snuck in a couple of times, but that was the deal. Down to Hot Springs, where Lansky had been able to set up his basic control of the local gamblers that ran casinos, and he bought into the Southern Club and the Belvedere, built the Vapors, the big nightclub that ended up getting blown up one night when there were some problems with a political group. But Owney just was a very beloved figure in Hot Springs. He, at this point, he was just a calm, quiet gentleman who spoke beautiful English and treated everyone with respect. People would tell stories about coming up to him and saying, "Gosh, this happened. My kid's, sick," or "We need money for the pool in the black area of town," and he'd pony up the money. He had so much money he didn't know what to do with it, but he still kept it coming in. He was running the race wire, the local race wire in Hot Springs. But he ended up dying in '65 of emphysema,
Mm.
and which was right about the time that the whole illegal gambling in Hot
Yeah.
Springs, where the governor just said, "Okay, I'm not going to take any more of your bribes. We're going to have to we're going to have to close you guys down." So that was roughly the time that things got changing, but they still cherish their uh, mob roots back in Hot Springs. When I went
Yeah.
back there in well, I guess it was 2004 with my dad to see his hometown again. We went to see the Arlington where they have the Capone suite, and
Yeah.
he would tell me stories about his parents, sewing for the gangsters, and so it was an end of an era, and it was a very interesting time. And I think Owney was just a really, really beloved character. I mean, when he died, his funeral, it was a pretty nasty storm. There were about 250 people outside. A bunch of limousines pull up, and a bunch of guys who had flown in from Chicago and New York and L.A. and Vegas. They all came to pay their respects to somebody that they held in very high regard.
That's one thing I find interesting about the mafia or the organized crime in this country is you have these interconnections nationwide, and if somebody is beloved or somebody has made somebody a lot of people a lot of money and not really hurt a lot of people, been a gentleman throughout his whole criminal life, if you will, they'll show up at funerals. I mean, that was the greatest place for us to go to a mob funeral and write down tags and get photos because these guys all show up. It's amazing.
That's right.
You
It's
know,
not
and,
just in
and
the movies.
yeah, you're talking about, Hot Springs is not that far from Kansas City. And a little side story. Oh, by the way, guys, I have a Hot Springs mob tour I did with Ron Rawson, who is a New Orleans expert, met me up there, and he's an expert on the different locations in Hot Springs, and I have that tour up on my YouTube page. So if you want to go see some of these spots that John's been talking about, the Vapors, the Belvedere, what was the other one?
Southern Club.
Southern Club, and Owney Madden's house is still there. Just was sold recently, I noticed, and so we walked all up around it, and there are a lot of other spots down there in Hot Springs. So it's it's a really interesting place.
And they've kept so much of it intact. All
Yeah,
the old bathhouses, which
yeah,
are actually not privately owned. They were owned by the federal government,
yeah,
and that was in a very small national park. It's right there, and they
yeah.
built them right inside there.
That's a good point. I never really thought about that. This den of wickedness, if you will, and then the federal government had owned those, that mountain and the hot springs right there, and it's a national park. And another thing about Hot Springs is most of the Major League Baseball teams had spring training down there, so they've got a bunch of signs around town about who had been in town and where they had stayed, and a place where Babe Ruth would hit home runs out of this little park into a alligator farm, which is still going. There's an alligator farm down there, guys, which is still going.
I will never forget that alligator farm. I went there when I was 4 years old. I went again and took my daughter, when we went back to, 20 years
Yeah,
ago.
yeah.
It's still there. It's just amazing. And they have that little merman in a case.
Yes, they still have the merman. I was just there last
Idiotic.
year. I know, it's crazy. And like you, the only trip we ever took when I was a little kid, we drove down through the South and then came back home. And we went to that alligator farm, and I was about 6 years old, and it scared the living bejesus out of me. All those alligators piled on top of alligators in those pens. And it's exactly the same as it was then. It's crazy.
Oh yeah, and that's been going on since before Oni got there. In the
Yeah,
early
yeah.
30s.
Yeah, and
Amazing.
that was a thing. Little side story about the spring training. There was a field real close, and they could hit a ball out of the park and go into the alligator farm. One of the not Major League Baseball, but one of the team team's owners started finding the players for hitting the ball out in the alligator farm because they lost the ball and he wanted to be reimbursed for the ball. So it's a pretty historic place for a variety of reasons and really off most people's radar. It's really, really interesting.
It is. And I plan on going down there again real soon, just to spend a little more time down there.
Plus, they still have horse races and they have a casino. So,
Oh yeah.
you can go back down and gamble. When I was about 18 years old, about the time they closed down in 1965, I had this older guy I hung around with, and he was a huge gambler, huge dice player with other guys in this small town. I'd lose $10 and I'd be like freaking out. But he would go for hundreds of dollars back in '65, and he kept telling me, he said, "Gary, we got to go down to Hot Springs. They got a real casino down there." We never did make it. I wish I had it now. But the vapors lasted clear up till '65, and I think Governor was it Winthrop Rockefeller closed all the gaming down, just cracked down on it.
Yep. Finally locked it all down. But,
yeah.
Now interesting. As you were talking about, the gambling and all, Owney was a really interesting guy in that he rarely drank during Prohibition. He didn't do any of that, and he didn't gamble. So even though he ran, alcohol and gambling operations, he stayed away from that. He just wasn't going to get sucked into that. Agnes helped to settle him down, as women have a tendency to do.
Yeah, because I believe she was her father the mayor or something. She was kind of connected to society in Hot Springs.
Yeah, he was the postmaster. Yeah, he was the postmaster, which in a small town was an elected position and held some sway, and that helped him work into Hot Springs society, getting tight with Mayor McLaughlin and the other power brokers that he had to pay off to keep things moving smoothly. But he fit in very well there. He was a celebrity in Hot Springs.
The Arkansas Godfather, huh?
Yeah. Final note here. Obviously all the gangsters would come and visit him, and when he was in prison, they'd come and visit Agnes because show respect. And it was in 1936 when Lucky Luciano was running from Dewey, who was trying to grab him and put him in prison. He goes down to Hot Springs where he knows that cops are going to let him do what he wants to do. They actually arrest him, but he's out, on $500 bond. Dewey just throws a fit, calls the governor, and has the state police come down and pick him up and send him back to New York, where he ended up going to prison.
Particularly corrupt chief of police all during those years. It was kind of well known. I can't remember his name now, but
oh yeah,
he to be smooth and just keep running.
Yeah, and he's the kind of a police chief that would stroll down the street with Lucky Luciano, just chatting and talking about whatever. The gamblers were a big source of their income, and they wanted to keep them coming.
Yeah, interesting. Well, it was a different time, a different place, wasn't it? One last note about that. When I was down there, I got to think, well, Bill Clinton, former President Clinton, he was raised in Hot Springs, so he was raised in this kind of aura of
criminality, are you saying?
Criminality.
Well,
might say something about his character. I don't know. I'm neither Democrat, Republican here, just about him as a person.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, but one thing about Hot Springs is just, and it probably had a lot in all the major cities, especially during Prohibition, where the gangsters were getting them what they wanted, what they'd always been able to have, and Owney, approached it like this is the perfect crime to do, where most people don't think it's a crime. The victimless crimes, and so then after Prohibition, it was gambling in Hot Springs, and again the victimless crime, and nobody looked at him differently for doing it, and he stayed away from violence pretty much the rest of his life, except for probably the final incident with Mad Dog Cole.
He had it coming. Yeah, he did. He did society a favor with that one.
Everybody was happy he was gone.
Everybody was happy. Interesting. All right, John Sanders. Well, thanks a lot, John. I really appreciate you coming on the show, and you know, keep good luck with your screenplay. Let me know if when you get something going with that. Why, we'll talk again. Anything else I can do in the future? If you work on any other mob stories, I can help you out. Why, be sure and give me a call.
You bet. Thanks so much. It's been fun.
Hey guys, don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles, so watch out for motorcycles when you're on the street. And if you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, go to the VA website. If you have a problem with drugs and alcohol, you know, our friend Ruggiano, Mr. Ruggiano from the Gambino family has a hotline number on his website, I believe. He's a drug and alcohol counselor, unless he seems to be doing pretty good with his YouTube page, so he may not be still working the Square John job. He may just be entertaining with his mafia knowledge now. But anyhow, just that's a place to go. And for gambling, you know, there's 1-800 bets off. We're just about to get sports gambling here in Missouri, and we've got it all around us. And so, you know, these problems, that's one reason the mob made so much money, because there's addiction related to it, and addicts will spend every cent they got in order to pursue their addiction until they, you know, they go into treatment or they die, or go into recovery and they die. So that's just how it is. And guys, don't forget, I've got books and movies on my website. Go take a look at them. My most recent book I took from some of my early podcast shows about Chicago, from Al Capone to Harry Aleman to Frank Calabrese Jr. and all in between, the Chicago PD Intelligence Unit. Got about 7 or 8 different stories, and it's called Windy City Mafia, the Chicago Outfit. It's on Amazon right now, or it's on my website, or just get hold of me through the website, and or email me, ganglandwire@gmail.com, and we'll work you out a copy, autographed copy. So thanks a lot, guys. And John Sanders, thank you so much for coming on the show and enlightening us about Owney Madden.
Thank you for having me. It's been a fun night.
Okay. All right, John.
All
Thank
right.
you. We're out of here. I appreciate you coming on the show. I'll let you know when I get this together. It'll probably be a month, maybe. I don't know. I'll make sure you know when it's going up and send you a link
Sounds
to it.
great.